So the best way to evaluate any sort of hay sample is going to be through a forage test, a forage analysis. You take some of the hay, send it to a forage testing lab. They'll analyze it and they can tell you the protein level, the fiber levels, the energy levels, those kind of things. And you can actually look and see, how good the hay is, because really what we're trying to do is the hay is just the package that we're providing nutrients to whatever animal that we're feeding it to. But sometimes we don't have a forage test available to us. And so we have to look at a hay. Maybe we have two different hays on the farm. We have to try to evaluate which one we think is better. Or maybe we're at a point where we're trying to purchase some hay and we don't have a forage test available, and we need to try to evaluate it. And so there are some ways that you can go through and do a visual analysis of a hay sample to try to tell some things about it and whether you think it's good or bad or some of those kind of things. And so a lot of times we have to do that when we're trying to judge hay shows. When people submit these hays, we don't have a forage test on these things, and so we'll have to visually evaluate so that we can rank some of these different hays. And so I thought we would talk a little bit about how we try to do that. And so what I'm going to try to do is just share a screen that shows the card that we use. Okay. And so this is just the form that we use, the hay judging form. And, there's nothing magic about this form, but it does give you some guidelines of things to try to look at. So we're going to kind of go through this card and explain kind of what to look for. And so if you look through right now, we have kind of 6 different categories that we look at. The first one is the stage of harvest. Okay, and the reason that we start there with that one is because the number one thing that's going to influence the quality of a hay, the nutrient content of a hay, is going to be the stage of maturity at harvest. Is it young and leafy, or is it old, stemmy with seed heads and that kind of thing? So that's the first category that we look at, and so it gives you these categories. Is it before heading or blossom? Is it kind of early heading? Is it kind of mid to late bloom if it's legume, or if a grass is a mid to late head stage, or is it in the seed stage, meaning it's really, really stemmy? So that's the first category that we look at, and you can see the different points that we assign there. The second thing that we look for is the leafiness, because leaves are where really they're the highest nutrient dense portion of the plant. And so we have these different categories. It goes all the way from very leafy down to stemmy. And so we try to kind of place where we think the hay is in terms of leafiness. The third category that we look at is the color. Okay, and really what you're trying to visualize is we would like the hay to have the same color, green, as it did when it was out there growing in the field. And so if we can the more of the green color that we maintain, what that means is the better the drying process was. It means it was warm, it dried quick, you're going to save that color. If it took a long time to dry, the sun is going to bleach out some of those that green color, so it's going to be a more yellow. If it got rained on, it carries some of the nutrients away, particularly the energy content. And so you're going to get a little bit more of a yellow to kind of a brown color. And so you can try to rank it, whether it's, that nice green color all the way to kind of a brown, maybe even a black color. If the hay was put up too wet so it heated, it could turn a little bit black. The next category we try to evaluate is going to be the odor. And that's just trying to smell the hay to see, does it have a nice clean odor, or is it a little bit maybe dusty, all the way to maybe there's, some mold in it. What can you smell in terms of that? And then the fourth thing we look at is the softness, because you got to remember when an animal's going to be eating this, they're going, first with their nose in there. So you want it to be soft, so it's not poking them, anything like that. And that's where you just grab it, squeeze on it, and see, how soft is it to your hand. And then the last category we look at is penalties, and mostly there you're thinking about kind of the presence of foreign material or weeds. Does it have a lot of sticks in it? Does it have some weeds that maybe have, spines or prickles on them, something that's going to decrease the palatability of it, and you can kind of adjust the scoring that you get. So that's the kind of the score sheet that we try to use. Now, just as any good forage specialist would have, I just so happen that I have a hay sample actually in my office. And so I thought what we would do is we would actually look at this hay sample and try to kind of go through this process. So when I get ready to look at stage of maturity, the first thing I'm going to do is kind of go through it and start looking for seed heads, you know. And so like I've got a seed head of Kentucky bluegrass there. Here's an orchard grass. So I've got this mixed grass A here. And the thing that I want you to notice, if I can hold this up so you can see it. So here's an orchard grass seed head. And so you can see that I've got all this stem here with it. Stem is, you're going to have a lot of fiber with that. Okay, and fiber is a negative thing in terms of the digestibility and the intake of that forage. So I'm going to just kind of dig through a sample, start to look for stems, look for seed heads, and see, you know, how far, how much stem do I have with them. And so in the case of, you know, this one, I can see these, you know, these stems and everything that I have. You know, I would probably score this one kind of in that, kind of that early blossom, early heading stage. I'd call it probably on the lower side of that, 22, 23, something like that. The next thing I'm going to look for is going to be the leafiness. So leaves versus stems. And so in this case, you know, I can see, you know, some of these areas where I have some leaves, but I also see some stems. So it's just a kind of a, I call it kind of in between that leafy to slightly stemmy type thing. So I would probably score this one somewhere about a 22 or so on that that leafiness. When it gets ready to look for the color, and I don't know if this is going to come across on the video, but I do have some green. I saved some green leaves in here. So this hay was put up, probably didn't get rained on. I dried, you know, relatively quickly. Okay, so I have some yellow as well as some green. So I would call this kind of in that light green to slightly brownish stage. I probably score this one an 11. From an odor standpoint, there's one way to get odor, and you just have to smell it. Okay, and this one, it just has a, you know, just a hint of a little bit of a kind of a dusty, slightly moldy kind of a smell. So I would probably score this one an 11 on the odor. And then the softness, you know, it's relatively soft. I'd probably call this one a 7 on that low side of soft. And then with at least the sample that I have right here, there really aren't anything that I would call, you know, particular penalties that would make this hay kind of unpalatable. And so that's kind of the process that we use on hay judging. A couple of things that you know are important to know is that, okay, so this is what we did with a grass hay. No legumes in this. Let's say that it was a legume hay. It was alfalfa. I would go through the same score sheet, the same process, okay, but I can't really look for seed heads because alfalfa is a legume, it produces blooms. So I'm looking for blooms. And so I start trying to pull, you know, individual plant stems out there, and I start looking up and down it and seeing, you know, how many blooms do I have? Are my blooms only at the top of the plant, which means it's going to be relatively young, or do I have blooms further down that stem? Or do I even potentially even have little seed pods on there? That's kind of the thing that I'm looking for. The other thing that's interesting about this, when I'm trying to evaluate grass hays, when I have cool season grasses, things like tall fescue and orchard grass, they actually only produce a seed head one time a year in that May period for that first cut. So it's possible that my second cutting, or even if if the hay was produced with a fall cutting, there won't be any seed heads in it. So I can't really use that head development to determine, you know, whether it's a kind of maturity. So there, what I do is I look for really basically brown dead leaves, because the older and more mature a hay is, as it gets older, the leaves on the bottom of the plant are going to be basically dying and turning brown. And if those get harvested in there, it drops the quality. But the real advantage that like a second and a third cutting of a cool season grass are going to have is that they're not going to have any stems. They're going to be almost pure leaf, which is going to mean my quality is going to be higher. So sometimes it's kind of hard to exactly, you know, use the same score sheet on a first cutting of fescue versus a fall cutting of fescue. That fall cutting is going to be much better because it's more leaf, no stem. But that's kind of the process. And, you know, don't get hung up. Specifically, let me stop this share here. So you don't necessarily need to get hung up on, you know, the exact score sheet and exactly what number it is. The point is it's giving you a guide to be able to evaluate, you know, where you think you are in terms of that specific hay quality. That hay, is it good or bad quality? Look for, you know, that stage maturity. Look for stems if it's a grass. Look for blooms if it's a legume. Look for how much leaf it has in it compared to how much stem it has in it. The more leaf, the better the quality is going to be. Look for that color. There's nothing magic about green color per se. It just gives you an indication about how well the hay was put up. Was it dried, you know, pretty quickly, so that it went from fresh in the field to the bale pretty quickly, or did it take a long time to get it dry so that it bleached out a little bit? Did it get rained on maybe so that you lose a lot of that green color? Next, you just look and smell it. See what kind of odor does it have. Is it a little bit moldy, or is it got that nice, clean, fresh smell? And that's going to give you an indication on the palatability. And then again, that softness just lets you know how well do you think animals going to be able to try to eat this thing. So that's just a little guide in terms of evaluating hay visually. Again, it's always better to have a forage test. But if you don't have that, there are some visual cues that you can look for to indicate the nutritive value this thing may potentially have.